in general, one of the holy grails of software engineering is code reuse, right? Somebody worked so hard to write something, and you shouldn't have to do that again, right? You should just be able to use it. You should be able to build other things on top of that thing. And look at all the great stuff that we built that way, like the World Wide Web, which is like, you know, PHP running in an Apache, which is like running in a container on like Linux, and then JavaScript in your browser, and like all these things just to put some text and a picture on your screen. I'm going to claim that the reason the web feels bad is because we don't really understand how to build things on top of other things, and it usually doesn't work that well. And the more stacks of things you have on top of other things, the more it's like Jenga or something, where the top is really wobbly, and if you're going to change a block in the middle, you stand a very large chance of knocking it down, right? Anybody who's worked with these systems seriously knows what I'm talking about. So I just want to say, like, code reuse is a good idea, yeah, except it's not. I get pissed off at things that try to reuse code all the time. For example, I've got this really simple shell here called Commander, which I still have installed on this laptop, but I rage uninstalled it from my Office machine for many reasons, right? Because it was causing me problems, right? First of all, every time I try to go and configure it or something, it's built on some whole other thing called ConEmu. It's like some thin display interface, and I don't know what ConEmu is. I don't want to care. Right? I want Commander to be as simple as it possibly can be in exposing its interface to me, but it's not, because there's this ConEmu thing there making it more complicated, right? It seems to involve Git in some way, like it's when I don't know if exceptions are being thrown or something weird happens, and it drops to some kind of weird Git prompt, and like, I don't use Git, I don't want to use Git. So that makes me angry. This also uses Perl. It drops to a Perl Git prompt, by the way. I don't know what that's all about, but apparently a lot of it's written in Perl. So it's like, oh, cool, use a higher level language, right? It installs Perl on your machine and puts it in the path. And you may want to install Perl for your own purposes, and they may be different and incompatible versions of Perl, which will then cause you a great deal of confusion if you're trying to get ready for a demo, as I was one day, and wanted to do real work, but I spent what seemed like many hours. It was probably really 45 minutes, but just what the hell is going on my machine? This is crazy, right? For this thing, it's just a console. It's just for me to type commands, right? It starts up really slowly. For some reason, a few versions back, they decided it would be cool to like pop up a new version detection box to try and get me to download an update to the new thing. I just want a command prompt, right? Now there's a box that I have to hit enter. It crashes for mysterious reasons, not the Perl Git prompt crash, but a different crash where it just completely disappears, right? And you know, I know computers pretty well. I could figure all this out if I wanted to invest that time, but I don't, because I'm a busy person. It's just a console and I want it to work. But it is a very typical example of things built on top of other things, right? If I was going to make a console, I would definitely use some things. Like I would use the operating system's display library, whether that's OpenGL or DirectX or something, right? I would use I wouldn't use a font render. I have my own font rendering stuff, but I would certainly use the TrueType file format or whatever to read the font. You know, there's certain layers of reuse that work, but reuse does not work to the degree that we try to employ it. And this is a major, major problem. And again, just like nobody seems very concerned with why nobody at Twitter and Facebook seems to know how to program, nobody seems to be concerned with the fact that we don't really know how to build things on top of other things. We just keep doing it. We just keep doing it, right? So the web is a giant mess, and I don't think it's going to get better anytime soon, because everybody's solution to making it less of a mess is put more things on. Hey, WordPress is really slow, so put a cache in there, right? Oh, your browser's really slow, so let's pre-compile the JavaScript on page load, right? And then maybe some of it all the way to assembly or whatever. It's just crazy. You don't make things better by making them more complicated. So Commander to me feels like the web. They feel like the same thing, and it really drives me bananas. Okay, I knew at this point that I was going to be worked up. So I'm going to try to calm down and conclude. So there isn't, right, it's easy to come out of school with feeling like you're smart, because you are. You know, if you got here and you're able to get through these classes, you're able to figure some stuff out. You know, you're able to do some stuff with computers, and that's all very cool. It is very easy to get a big head and say like, oh, I'm going to go out in the world and I know better than most. Twitter is obviously stupid. Look at, they could barely do anything. I'm going to go out and do something better. And maybe you can, but also take a certain measure of caution, because actually very few people, or probably zero people, either in academia or industry, know how to program right now. We're kind of, I didn't put a title on this lecture, but I almost called it the dark age of programming, because I sort of feel like we're in one. Because the more you know about programming, the more you realize that everything we do is like really scary, and everything like barely works. And if you just like kick it, it's going to fall over. Some things have worked. I don't want to be a negative Nelly through the whole thing, right? Most of these are really old ideas, but these are a couple of the things that I think have been the most effective in the history of programming, right? This idea, hey, we shouldn't program in assembly language. We could use a higher level language, right? It was also called, well, there was one slight step beyond this called structured programming, which was just like, don't use gotos everywhere, like use loops and ifs and stuff, right? That was a major idea back when it happened, and it's been very effective, and I don't think anyone wants to go back from that, except a few friends of mine. But only on occasion, like, you know, I mean, in games, people still program in assembly sometimes. And if you're writing shaders, you may program in assembly often. But it's a fake assembly, so I don't know. Anyway. Static compile time, strong type checking is another idea that I think is very successful. It's more controversial because there's probably still people at this university who think Lisp is great or Scheme is great or whatever. If you have a strongly typed at compile time variant of Lisp, then I'm all in favor of that. But if you don't, just run away. Like I said, it's more controversial. A lot of people will disagree with me, but I think this is one of the most successful ideas in the history of computers, right? So it's not all negative, but these ideas do not come along very often, right? The massively successful ideas do not come along very often. Maybe I should put code commenting out here, because it's very successful despite the drawbacks that I mentioned, when employed correctly. But it's sort of too obvious of an idea to make this list. But all this other stuff, you know, reuse, exceptions, you know, data hiding, functional programming, all of these are contextually useful. And in your career, you will find yourself in many contexts. And even one program has many contexts within the program. And in some contexts, certain techniques are going to be useful. And in other contexts, if you blindly apply those techniques, you're going to be digging yourself a hole, and you'll be very sad. But then the extra thing is, if you try to mix together too many programming paradigms, then you just get a big confusing mess. So it's very hard, right, to program well. I said possibly nobody in the world knows how to program well. You can try though, right? It's very difficult, and it just requires constant vigilance. You need to keep checking your assumptions and checking your ideas about how to program. And that's all that I have to say. I don't know if we have time for Q&A or what. Yeah? Okay, we'll do some questions. Anyone? Yeah.
How did you start into the video game industry, deciding to make a video game and sort of saying that's going to be my profession seems kind of like a hard thing to do. How did you start?
I did exactly what you just said. I decided to make a video game and said that's going to be my profession. Although I didn't have that much of a look ahead. So I said, oh, I'll make a video game. I actually started a company with a friend who I'd met here at school, and we didn't know very much about games, and we had a lot of problems at that time. But it was also the biggest learning experience. Like, I learned way more doing that than in school. But also, if I hadn't done school, I wouldn't have been prepared for that. So when I say that, I'm not, slagging on school. I'm just saying there's so much to learn past that. Yeah.
How will we know when we are programming well? What's the test? That's beyond we say you're now programming.
You don't, if nobody really knows how to program that well, you can only compare yourself relative to other things. So compared to where you were, so I can look back at what I thought was good programming when I started that first game company, right? So in college, I thought I was a good programmer. I thought I was one of the best programmers. I did all these personal projects that were way more sophisticated than anyone else. I like to make little programming languages, so I would build languages. I think when I sort of stopped working on it, the most complex thing I had built was a 14,000 line program that was an interpreter for my own language, which in college seemed really big. I don't know what you guys do these days, but back then it seemed really big. That is a trivial program compared to what I do now, right? So I thought I was real smart back then, but I would look at what I was doing and I'd say, that's not that interesting, and what you're doing it in a dumb way, stop it and do it a different way, right? So as long as that keeps happening, as long as you can keep looking back and seeing how you've improved, then that's good, right? If that ever stops, then you maybe question what you can do. You can also do it by looking at other people, and I did that. And I'm trying not to be mean about it, because I don't know what it's like socially at Berkeley, but back when I was in school, there was a certain mean-spirited show-offiness that sort of pervaded programmer culture, right? Because you want to show that you're good at it, right? And there's this it's almost like an extension of the high school social thing, but among programmers, where you're showing how badass you are all the time or something. Wait, why was I saying that? I just got lost in reverie. Anyway, it's very easy, especially coming out of that environment, if it's still that way, to kind of be mean-spirited. And I don't think that's productive. So you don't really want to be like Linus Torvalds or something and calling everybody an idiot. However, I also believe in calling it like it is, which is why I feel pretty safe in saying that nobody at Twitter knows how to program. No, that's again a little bit mean way to say it, but whatever environment has been established at Twitter, I'm trying to find that graph of employees, whatever environment has been established there that keeps 2,000 engineers from doing more than the current website is destructive and poisonous. And let me put it this way. So I just mentioned when I started my game company, it was pretty close to out of school. I did one other thing. I did a less than a 1-year contract. Actually, 2 other things that were small. We started a company, and we really didn't know how to make games at the start of that. And it was the very most difficult time to start making games, because you didn't have graphics accelerators or anything that would draw graphics for you. So you had to learn how to do 3D graphics pixel by pixel, which is not even what they taught I never took a computer graphics class in college, but back then they didn't teach that stuff here either. You would use OpenGL to draw triangles. That was what they taught. So you had to figure that stuff out, and then you had to figure out how to do it fast. And then you had to build a game around that somehow worked. It was like revving a fast car on Redline all the time. I was learning so much because I was being very, very challenged, right? If you go into a big, boring company that's not doing very much right out of school, it's when you're ready to learn things, to keep learning and to get a lot better, right? To just keep take the learning that you've gone here and keep extrapolating that line. And if you go into a very stodgy environment, or one where things don't happen very well, or where you can't do things very well, you're not going to be able to learn that well, and you're going to become a worse programmer than you would be. I can say that pretty definitively. The difference between somebody who goes into a challenging environment versus a boring environment is stark. Now, all this said, so I've said all this stuff about Twitter. Again, I don't know anything about Twitter. I don't know if I know any programmers at Twitter, and I bagged on Facebook too. I don't know anybody at Facebook. I know a couple people at Facebook. Not anymore, though. That's not what I meant by that. That would be good. Probably not anymore, really. But I'm just looking at output versus input, right? And it's insane. So I don't want to be mean about it, but I feel like there are ethical issues involved in all this, right? You guys all deciding what you're going to do with your life when you come out of school it's an important time, right? And so I feel like it's important to warn you about certain things. If you're going to go someplace and it's going to make you a crappy programmer, I'd rather save you the year or two that it might take you to figure that out, if you even notice before it happens. So this is a massive overgeneralization, but it's mostly true. Just don't go to any company that does web stuff. Go do something else somewhere else. Or even if you go somewhere like Google that's ostensibly a web company, just make sure you don't work on websites. Make sure you go do cars or AI or something cool like that. They've probably got a Google rocket ship they're working on in private, right? Do one of those. Do not work on websites because they'll kill your brain. Okay, yeah, other questions. Just cut me off when we run out of question time, by the way.